House Republican leaders making a counteroffer in the fiscal cliff talks that was immediately rejected by the White House yesterday. The proposal calls for $800 billion in increased tax revenue over the next decade, which is half of what the president proposed in his plan. The GOP plan does not include higher tax rates for the wealthy. That is the central issue dividing the parties. We're joined this morning by a member of the House GOP leadership. Majority Whip Kevin McCarthy joins us from the Hill. Congressman, good to have you. Good morning.
Thanks for having me.
A lot's been made over whether or not you're trying to sell this as a Bowles, as an Erskine Bowles endorsed plan. Are you?
We're not trying to sell Erskine Bowles, but Erskine Bowles talked about this framework when he was before the super committee, about 800 in revenue, about 1.4 in spending cuts when you go for mandatory cuts and then discretionary cuts. We meet that framework, and that just so happens to be the framework that the president talked about when he was campaigning. He has now changed the goalpost of where he wants to go with the Geithner plan. We're trying to make sure we don't go off the fiscal cliff, while at the same time protect growth, give the revenue that the president asked for, but also find those spending cuts to control the growth of government to actually save what we need to do.
You mentioned Bowles changing his tune. He does say, in his words, circumstances have changed. It's up to negotiators to figure out where the middle ground is today. Do you think that middle ground moved in any direction as a result of the election?
Well, I think one thing you got to see, you kind of have status quo. The president won re-election. The Republicans kept the majority in the House. I think you saw where Republicans went right after the election. You had the speaker sit there and say, you asked for revenue, here's revenue. If the president asked for $800 billion in revenue, we're providing it in a way that we believe is a better growth to protect small business. At the same time, the president said it had to be a balanced approach, 2 for 1. But if you watch what Geithner proposed, new stimulus programs and others, the spending increases. You're not going after the spending cuts of what we've been trying to get to.
Well, Congressman McCarthy, Jim Cramer here.
Yeah.
I worry what you're talking about. It's so wide-ranging that it makes me feel you don't have enough time to do it. You're going on vacation. The American people want to know what you're going to do, and why should you be able to take a vacation without legislation?
We shouldn't. We should stay here. We should be in the room. Look, when we first made the proposal after the election, the president took 3 weeks to respond. We responded right back because we don't believe we should. We want to be in the room. Let's get this done. You watch the speaker every day trying to make that happen. We're meeting with governors today. We're meeting with small business tomorrow. We're willing to sit here. Let's get this done. There's no reason to go over the fiscal cliff. There's no reason to play games. But the Geithner proposal is asking this place to go where the Democrats wouldn't even go. The president, in essence, gave his budget proposal that hasn't even got one vote from either side. We want to be serious. The president asked for $800 billion in revenue. We've offered it. The president said it had to be balanced, so we go after the spending cuts. This is something that Erskine Bowles said before the super committee. We are trying to be reasonable and smart on this approach. That's why we don't want to waste time. We don't want to go on vacation. We want to sit here and work and get the job done.
Why no mention of the debt limit, per se, and whether or not Congress has authority over that? Is that just too messy to deal with right now?
I think when you start adding everything else in, that just makes it impossible to get to. We want to see a framework where we take a bite of the apple right now, have overall tax reform next year to unshackle what holds this country back, and let's get out of this mess.
Ken Conrad has said maybe everybody should get on helicopters and go to Camp David. Is that a reasonable suggestion? I mean, can you envision leadership getting together with the White House and actually going to Camp David?
You know, we don't have to go to Camp David. We'll go to the White House, or he could come here. You don't have to do some elaborate scene. We don't have to make some television production out of this. Let's just get in the room and solve it. You don't have to send Geithner down in the process. It doesn't take a lot. He laid out a framework of a balanced approach. 800 in revenue, but twice as much in spending cuts. He hasn't talked about the spending cuts. That's why we responded rapidly. We didn't wait 3 weeks. We want to solve the problem. We can get this done.
There's been a lot of discussion today about what's being termed the let's jump crowd, those who think that going over the cliff would actually be some of the best medicine the country could take. Is that destructive to this process or not?
I think that's destructive, and you're going to find that on both sides of the aisle. But if the president keeps changing the goalposts, you almost feel like Maybe that's the process he wants to go, and that's not productive. The American public is not looking for that. They're looking for people to come together. And you know what? There are so many other challenges that face us in the next year. We've got to learn to crawl, then to walk, and then to run. We've got to be able to get together, find the compromise, and move this country forward. And that's exactly what we did with our proposal. Why now, when the proposal goes forward, if this is something you've been asking for, in the framework and the structure of what you said, why now is that unacceptable? You can't move the goalpost in the middle of the discussions.
You talk about moving the goalposts, Congressman, but I mean, one thing the president seems to have been consistent on, certainly before and after the election, is taxes need to go up in the top 2% of earners in this country. That's something you simply will not allow for, correct?
Look, the president says he needs more revenue. We offered more revenue in a way that you could protect small business. In the president's proposal, he's going after from inheritance tax, he's expanding from dividend tax. That's going to harm a lot of individuals. We're finding, how do you control growth, and I mean to enhance growth, but at the same time protect small business? That's revenue. We put revenue on the table. That's a fundamental difference than you heard from Republicans 8 months ago. So you know what? This is a compromise and a place where the president should be able to get. But at the same time, the president has offered nothing in spending cuts when he said he wanted a balanced approach and at least 2.5 to 3. He's got to be serious. He's offered more spending, more stimulus than offering any new cuts.
There have been some polls, and I'm sure people can point to others that say different, but the latest one out of ABC Washington Post is that Americans, if we did go over the cliff, would blame the GOP more than they do the White House. How do you respond to that?
You know what? You shouldn't play politics with this. I think people should come before politics. If you watch the nature of what Republicans have done here, we've talked about this and passed legislation last year, from sequestration to making sure we're not going over the cliff. We've responded to every presidential proposal. We've been first on the mix. The actions don't hold up to where the polls are, but we want to make sure we solve this problem and don't go over the cliff.
Finally, as someone who signed this offer, or was one of the signatories of this offer, in real estate parlance, is this a best and final or not?
Look, we responded to where the president was, and we didn't take 3 weeks to do it. We want to solve the problem. We want to get into the room. And I don't think this has to be letter to letter. Let's sit down in the room and work out our differences. The first and foremost, the president should show where he's talking about a balanced approach and show us where the spending cuts are. I think we've come and said, here's the revenue. Now let's talk about where the spending cuts.
Congressman, you've got all our attention. Thanks so much for your time this morning.
Thanks for having me.